What's going on, Reef Builders? I'm Jake Adams. Thanks for joining us for another episode of ReefStock at Home. Everybody's still stuck at home playing with their reef tanks, so we are doing what we can to bring together the community as much as possible to just inspire and motivate people to learn more about their reef tanks and their corals and their fish. And in our previous installment of ReefStock at Home, we had a heavy focus on Australian reefers, and we had some great contributions from the land down under. I'm pretty sure they hate that when we say that. But for today's ReefStock at Home, we're going to have a heavy focus on aquaculture. And being a coral guy, this is going to be mostly about, I mean, it's going to be all about corals, I guess. But yeah, especially with what's happening very recently in Hawaii, where a bunch of Hawaiian fish are not being readily available, and there's only going to be captive bred yellow tangs. It's funny to say that there's never been a more important time to really focus on aquaculture, but to be honest, like you can't put too much effort into aquaculture. So we kind of have a thread for this broadcast for you guys. We're going to start on the natural reef. Then we're going to go to an importer in Bali. Then we're going to talk to someone about zoanthid growing. And then we're going to talk about an up-and-coming technique that a good friend of Reef Builders has been testing and experimenting. And he's got a lot of great observations. And that's going to be followed up by Jeremy from Brightwell talking about specifically how you can apply that to your own reef tank. So the first video is one that we published about 2 years ago. It's probably one of my favorites that I've ever put together because I was on location in the Solomon Islands, basically restarting the coral farming projects over there. So aquaculture should really be a holistic practice. And it's not just about growing corals and fragging corals at home for yourself, because if we did that to the nth degree, we would completely disenfranchise the people that actually live on the coral reefs. So having that end-to-end holistic connection from the coral reefs to our home is really, really important as we increase our focus and spotlight on aquaculture. So yeah, enjoy this video of the coral farming workshop from the Solomon Islands. What's going on, reef builders? It's another fine morning here in Marau Sound in the Solomon Islands. Yesterday I showed you, or in the previous video, I showed you a gorgeous, gorgeous soft coral reef. A huge diversity of leathers, sarcos, lobophytums, really overlooked groups. You definitely want to go back and check out that video. But today we are here for the main event. We got our boy Lincoln. Lincoln was a part of one of the first groups of villagers here to farm coral. So we're actually going to be shallow diving some existing frames that have been, I guess, neglected for a while, but the corals are still there. The broodstock is still there. So that's what we're here to do. We are going to collect some broodstock, some sample coral specimens to demonstrate, what the aquarium hobby wants them to farm. So what's interesting is the workshop, we're just gonna be answering some of their questions because these are actually some of the most experienced coral farmers in the world. But I want to show you a little example of, this is one coral we collected at the village. You getting that? Mm-hmm. This is Acroporas turaki. Hawkins echinata is probably this strain, and it probably came from here because a lot of the diversity in the aquarium hobby actually originates from the Solomon Islands. But man, even in sunlight, no blues, this thing is absolutely gorgeous. Really nice bottle brush species. So we're just gonna go underwater and revisit the old coral tables, collect just some example broodstock specimens just to show them what we want to see in the aquarium hobby. And there's also a really nice giant Gygas clam right here posted next to the coral table. So it's time to suit up, get under the water, and hope you guys, thanks for tuning in, and I hope you guys enjoy this, the beginning of restarting the coral farms here in the Solomon Islands. Okay, so we're here at the village, and we're just about to start up a little workshop and show these folks. Actually, they're going to show us more than we're going to show them because they're the original coral farmers. But some of the tastes and aquarium preferences have changed. So say hi, everybody. Hi. So this is what's the name of this village, Lincoln?
Naohanua.
Naohanua. So this is Lincoln. He's the man. He's going to be, you know, teaching and learning from this village here, and got Tim in the shot right here. And man, like I said, we're excited to get this started. I guess we're gonna, like I said, we're gonna learn as much from these people as they are from us. So let's see what they have to say.
We tell them last time we go around and we come around, so content. So before we go to start, like give respect to whoever I'm responsible here. So we'll watch our opening and we start. От короля сем короли ми лохе нама, сама короле чи ми гарем лохе. Minus ada korban tu wala explain ada korban tu. Ini no garem awat ya. Plus driver, so ini program ya. So la precision bring come on our sides.
So this is an example of the size and starting diversity of the corals. We've got some nice little thin bottle brushes here, little pink stylophora right there, very nice. I think this is the blue tort. Blue tort is very common here. This is actually probably one of the places where aquarium blue torts came from. Got a little bit of schmidti, some kind of a nice colorful aculeus here, really beautiful species, and very nice colorful tipped staghorn with kind of greenish branches. Very nice. But this is maybe a little bit bigger than the size of the corals that they would normally start out as, and but just for demonstration purposes. And this is actually hard to tell in this light, but it's actually a blue tip pink millipora, really beautiful specimen. And this is kind of a bluish purple monster type thing, blue purple monster, which originally came from the Solomon Islands. So we just did a little quick kind of little fragging demo about what size they're going to do. And here in the Solomons, they actually have their unique method for mounting the coral frags. They use a continuous piece of string to attach to these cement discs on this wire mesh. And yeah, let's see how they do it.
Because we know like it papas mutan ni follow making and follow.
Tim's getting in there, learning from the masters, from the experts.
But this corals here is made for the big disc. It's not the small disc.
So right now we're taking rootstock that we took from the racks, the overgrown rootstock. We clipped it down into like this size pieces. We came here, we clipped it into smaller pieces, and now we're going to a little workshop on just showing anyone else who hasn't planted coral before how to tie it onto the line.
Cool.
Let's all think about that. I think that might be a good prize.
That's low here.
Here in the Solomons, like I said, they have a unique method for planting the corals. They make these discs by just making a thin layer of cement and take like a lid or PVC to punch these out. And then they punch out a couple little holes in there. And over here, you can see that they take a single piece of string and basically tie the coral on and kind of weave it through the mesh, tie the next coral, tie the next coral, tie the next coral, and they'll tie it off at each end. And then they use these sticks here to make it tight, to make sure the coral stays down. So this is actually one of the least material intensive methods of coral farming I've actually ever seen. Documented a lot of different ways to farm corals, and this is probably one of the most sustainable for communities that don't have access to a lot of materials. So this is really cool. Everybody jumped in, everybody got their hands wet, everybody fragged some corals just to jog their memory. But there's definitely a couple ladies here who are just professionals. I don't know where they are in the crowd right now, but they were just like old times, putting it all together. So I don't think we'll have any problems, kickstarting this program again, getting it back and going. Obviously they need some new mesh, but in time we'll give them some more material. So let's go get these in the water. Okay, so if you're just joining us, that was the first video to kick things off here at ReefStock at Home, where we are having a focus on aquaculture. This is a video that we published about 2 years ago, and this was one of the original locations of coral farming of any kind in the world. Back in 1997, 98, and really kind of kicking off in 99. I went there in 2019, and there was a lot of people there that knew how to farm coral, and they just needed some help to get started again. And it's really awesome to be in the Solomon Islands and to see so many iconic coral strains. And there's definitely a few points I want to bring up. In our tanks, everybody has super blue lighting. And I think my whole theme for this year is going to be encouraging people to whiten up their tanks, because some of the true pink colors, and especially all the blues and purples, are just totally gone if your tank is totally blue. And you saw how many of those corals look beautiful in sunlight. That should be the goal, not hacking your way with fluorescents and yellow filters to show, the fluorescence of your corals. But more importantly, this is, Solomon Islands is one of the corners of the coral triangles. It has an incredible amount of diversity, and we're definitely going to be experiencing some more corals coming from there, hopefully in the near future when the virus situation kind of loosens up. But one of the things that's really interesting to see about how they do it in the Solomon Islands is it's very basic. is so basic, it's artisanal. It's the kind of work that everyone in the village can do together. The women, the men, the children. There's some pictures out there somewhere from back in the day of the women basically sitting in water that just comes right up to here. They have a shelf, you know, kind of like just sitting over them, and they can just sit there and string up corals onto some pre-made coral discs that have the little holes inside. They use readily available fishing line to tie them down. Just really great, because that's actually very cheap and very secure on those coral discs. And I think that one of the most important things about farming on location is you are literally directly adding value to the coral reef. As a hobbyist, if you buy a farmed ocean frag that you know came from a village like this, your money is going through a pipeline that is going directly to those people to buy food, to buy medicine. But usually the women, they want money for school fees, you know, basically to get some basic education for their children. So if you're just joining us, this is ReefStock at Home. We are doing a nice live stream, and it's going to be all focused on aquaculture. So our first video was out on the reef, and our next one is going to be from Bali, but the inland coral farm of Vincent Chalias, who was one of the pioneers of coral farming in Indonesia. Before we fire up that video, I want to answer a few questions, but also remind everybody that we have some amazing giveaways at the end of the stream. We have 3 CChem Division 125 protein skimmers. I am not kidding when I say that that skimmer really punches above its weight class. And I'm going to be getting some more just because I really like how they operate. And 3 Radeon XR30 Pro Gen 5 Pros. These are really, really bright, top-of-the-line light. If you have any kind of reef tank going on, definitely be taking a step up by adding one of those to your tank. But let me go ahead and start taking a peek at some questions. So Reef Community Worldwide says, why don't they just take frags from the colonies from the wild instead of the full colony? Well, that's not really preserving the colonies so much. So in third world countries, the main, the understanding is that you're supposed to take a chunk of the colony and then you take that back to your farm so you have some brood stock and you frag from that. So no reason they can't take frags from the colonies, but it's better to do it all in one location, because sitting there on a wild colony taking little frags, that's just not practical when you're diving. Gabe's Reef Tampa says, can you use some coral spotlights on different corals are doing since I've collected them? So I just did one a couple weeks ago on the Immortal Tort, which is featured on the previous video of my top 10 corals. But the corals that I've collected are usually like just really weird ones, branching Acroporas, Gardenoceras, Palaustrea, just these weird corals that I get when I'm diving, because I know that no one will ever collect them, because sometimes they're just shades of brown and gray, and I like them because they have an interesting. But long story short is, yes, I will definitely do more. Lucas A says, I love the multi-layer plating effect found in nature to compete for space and sunlight. If you're a longtime reefer and you go out into the natural reef and you see like corals really competing, just so many things that you have conceptualized about corals in your life and your aquarium really solidify when you see them out in the wild. For example, I'm starting to push back against deep water corals, deep water acros, because some of these deep water acros might be living in very shallow water underneath another coral. So it's not as useful of a description. But that's one of the many ways that diving natural reef really informs what we do on our home aquarium. Peter C says, wow, no glue. Could you imagine trying to ship enough super glue to make frags out in the wild, and one good wave comes along? That's not going to hold, and then having them sit there and hold the frag for a while. But they have a system where they string the string through every single frag plug, and it's not even, they only tie it off at the end, so they don't have to tie it over and over and over again. So really, really clever and efficient way to farm corals. Jonathan Weidenbaum says, what do you think the most important thing to keep your corals happy? The most important thing is to keep them in water. Second most important thing is make sure it's not boiling and freezing. Third most important thing is make sure it's seawater. That is a very broad question that's hard to address, but how do you know if your corals are happy? And that's observation. Look at your corals. No controller will tell you the health of your aquarium. That's just not possible. You have to observe your corals, look at other people's corals, other people's tanks, live stream videos, and see what the examples of really lush, thriving corals are. Marco Mansano from Brazil says, I noticed the water flow in this coral farm looks like don't so strong as we do in our reef. Is this correct what I saw in the video? Yes, it is correct. The corals that we collect, so where we were is a big, big famous shallow lagoon, Morao Sound. So there's probably like I don't know, a few city blocks wide, and it stays really, really shallow. That's where you want your farm. You want a sheltered area for the coral frags to take hold. But the broodstock came from right outside the sound where there's more reef and deep and open water. So that's a really good observation from Marco. So good eye there, my man. So just to remind everybody, we have some great giveaways at the end of this stream. I think we're ready to show off the facility of Bali Aquarium in Bali. Like I said, Vincent was one of the pioneers of coral farming, like we just showed you in Solomon Islands, except he did it in Indonesia. But he's taking a page from our playbook lately, and he's doing a lot more inland coral culture for certain species. Like, for example, like a great one is Stylosignala or Samacora. When you go diving, you'll see pieces here and there, but they're not competitive on like the open reef. They're usually found like sheltered or in a cave or in between corals. And so even when you farm them out in the ocean, they don't grow the way we're used to in our aquarium. So for some of these more, demanding or picky species, he grows them in this inland coral farm using LEDs, using additives, using equipment that will be familiar. So definitely, it's a little bit hard to hear him, but in this clip, but definitely take a good look at everything that he's showing off and realize that this is a 10,000 gallon coral farm that's just a stone's throw away from like open ocean water. That way he can more tightly control the chemistry and the nutrients and the conditions in order to make his corals as happy and healthy as possible. So here is Vincent Chalice's inland coral farm at Bali Aquarium.
So this is our first farming system, lighted with combo rays, Illumagic, one blaze, few vitamines. On this one we use also the Triton method with Core 7 and a small calcium reactor, to boost the minerals. So here is a view from the other side. So we have the chiller in the middle. The water falls down into the refugium is light for the night, goes into the skimmer compartment and the pump with active carbon and ferric oxide. The tanks use a gyre system, so the water turns around it. Each system has its own pump and filtration system, and on this system we use an old Vertex calcium reactor to boost the mineral. So this is what we have in this tank. Bernard Flora, all the different coloration. Some Goniastrea, Favia, Favites, Cyphastrea. Then some of our nice Alveopora and Goniopora, some Samocora, a little bit of Colastrea, some Pectinia we're going here. This is where I color up my Tenuis and Millepora under the blaze. So a little bit of SPS coloring up in this tank. Then the other side, it's got some combo rays with a bit of Montipora, some Goniopora, some nice chalices, growing down there. Some Montipora, some Privites, some Micromusa, and some Palawensis Montipora and the fluorescence Montipora. Then we have Heliofungia fralinae, mother colony, doing a lot of babies. Some Bernardophora, Stylociela, Favia, Favites, Goniastrea, all of those. And here the chiller, the dosing pump, and the Core 7. On the other side, some Bernaphora, some chalices, going nicely. We have all our nice chalice here, our Legicos, and some other few nice different strains. All the Convict. Our nice Samokora. Some more Convict. And our Blastomusa. Here, some of our my-cultured chalice. Then some Pava, Micromusa, Echinophilia, even a couple of Manchipora, some Kimpao going there, and Palawensis following up. Here we have some few Echinophilia in the shade, some Samokora, some very nice gold Cyphastrea under the light, a few chalices, some Blastomus merlepi. That's the gold chalice, going down nicely, and some Rainbow Xanthilia, some more chalice, Algae. And here this is where we color up some few Samokora, Montipora. This one on Core 7. Here you have the Refugium, which is only lit at night. The Skimmers. Some of the pump, going on the southern part of the system, and then this going back to where all the other pumps are on the other side. Since we are remodeling our export system, we are stocking a lot of our SPS in that system. So we color them up again, with Illumagic Blaze Blue with Vitamin E Actinic. And on the other side, we grow Zoanthids. So this part of the system is only lit with Vitamin E Actinics at different intensity. We just add more lights, so we stock up our mycultured Gonioporas, but we also produce our Micromusa and Goniopora and Cyphastrea in those systems. A lot of flow in those systems. Some chalices. And some of our WYSIWYG. That's the chiller reactors that we make ourselves. Some more Gonioporas, some few torches, some Kumpao, a lot of chalices that we produce. some branching hammers we produce here, some fox spawn that we produce here. Gold torch, chalice, leptoceris, mycedium, some fox spawn, torches, some more branching hammers, some of our mini carpet, some more fox spawns, some more gold torch, so this one is equipped with a wave box, which I love the things, some broodstock colony for torches, some wall hammers, torches, 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 and some of our old LPS broodstock. So here we have Wulan again checking the salinity. So that system, this is where we stock up our soft corals, mariculture soft coral, and we color them up and tank harden them. Here at the moment we're stocking a bit, and here we're trying to culture a bit of zoanthids. Yes.
So if you're just tuning in, that was a kind of a run and gun style overview of the Bali Aquarium inland coral farm. So we started with a coral farm right in the wild, right on the lagoon, with the villagers that live right next to the reef farming their own corals. And we talked about aquarists becoming informed by wild corals in the natural reef. And that was a really interesting and probably a very rare facility because, like I said before, Vincent was one of the pioneers of coral farming, and he has become informed by the aquarium hobby. So Vincent's been all over the world. I've been there with him to a lot of awesome reef tanks. And, you know, there's certain things that you can do in an indoor, a captive, closed aquarium environment that you can't do out in the wild. You know, one of the drawbacks of wild coral farming is it's very seasonal, you know, so there's certain times where there's like a lot of algae growth. There's certain times where the nutrients are really, really low and the corals don't grow. There's other times, obviously, it's going to get super hot and a lot of farm corals die because they're out in the wild. So this is Vincent's approach to kind of splitting the difference between, you know, what he does on the farm and what we do in our home tanks. So what you saw there is, I've been there before, so I kind of know a little bit more what I'm looking at. And there was an interesting question. I'll get to the questions here in a little bit. Someone asked if there was a sump that was connected to everything. They don't have sumps there, right? They have concrete pools built into the ground, and that is the sump area. That is what is helping to collect and just redistribute the water everywhere. Another question you might have is about the chillers, because Bali gets really hot. So if he didn't chill these tanks, they would absolutely overheat. So you might have seen these kind of cylinders with a line going up the ceiling. Basically, he has a compressor up on top of the building, and he has these heat exchangers kind of just drop down all over the place in between these tanks as needed to adequately cool the water of each of those aquariums. It's super cool to see him using the Illumagix LED light, and one of the reasons for that is because that they're not crazy brightness that need the active cooling like we're used to from Radions or Hydras or Kessels. So they have a lot of heat sinking, so they can actually passively cool, and that's why he goes with those lights. And they still have the interchangeable LEDs. Another thing to see is he's got. I know he is continually like linking systems. So at first he had 3,000, 3,000, and 3,000. So I think I want to say like ballpark around 10,000 gallons altogether. And instead of just using a calcium reactor or just using dosing, he has multiple calcium reactor and he uses dosing. What else? The protein skimmers. Like, how weird is it to see a commercial facility that doesn't have one giant car size and car price protein skimmer. Instead, he has 8 kind of mid-range protein skimmers. And in some ways, it's a little bit more work, you know, to keep all of those clean. But if one of the pumps goes out, or if some of the pumps aren't performing well, you'll still have a lot of protein skimming. And he's been on that same train with me of like feeding a lot to his corals. Is there anything else I wanted to point out there? Someone asked about LPS. There was a lot of LPS in that shot. He was, you know, again, you know, this is a busy facility and can't exactly turn off all the flow and give a delicate look at everything. So he was just very much run and gunning to provide the video for this live stream. But there's acros under the highlight. There's lots of LPSs, lots of chalice corals, lots of brains and moons. And one of the things that I need to get onto is that oscillating water flow. So maybe a couple of weeks back, he did an article on the Toonsy wave box, which is a patented method to create like really good, strong oscillatory flow for his torch corals. And if you haven't seen Euphilia, just going back and forth with the current, man, you have not seen Euphilia like at all. You haven't seen anything. So seeing a group of torches just going back and just their polyps really waving back and forth. It's great for the coral. First of all, it's great freaking water flow, but it's also really awesome and mesmerizing. So really want to thank Vincent for that video. I'm going to get to the questions. I'll remind everybody we got a bunch of awesome prizes at the end of the stream. It's not going to be very long, so stay tuned. Oh, I forgot what somebody was just going to ask. All right, so what do we have here? Somewhat Northern Reefer says, I'd love to see an ICP from these farms. And I think he meant the previous video. And the thing is, man, I've taken ICP tests all over the world. And you know what? They're pretty much a seawater standard reference. You can buy a seawater standard reference from chemical supply companies to test your equipment. And with few exceptions, this is one of the first things we learn as marine scientists when I went to school is like the proportions of everything in the ocean is exactly the same, virtually the same almost everywhere. You might have a little bit localized trace elements here and there, but it's very rare. The only thing that changes is the salinity of the water and, you know, the concentration of all the elements, but they're all in balance. What else? So Brett Durda asks, speaking of staying in water, was there any concern of the length of time the corals were out of the water while the fishing line was strung through the grating? I will work on a tank sometimes, and I will literally take a coral or a frag and put it on the overflow box for 10 minutes. After 10 minutes, I'm not even thinking about it. Obviously, I'm not going to do that with a lot more delicate coral like a Euphilia. It's definitely not a bubble coral, definitely not a Cinerina, but especially the SPSs with some exceptions. Acros can be out for a long time as long as they stay wet. Bird's nests don't like it, Stylophoras don't like it, and some of the thin Leptoceras don't like it. But by and large, I've been coral collecting and we wrapped everything in newspaper, not in water, and we piled them up high in the boat and we just poured water over them to make sure they didn't dry out. So hope that answers your question. Nikolai Morel says, are any of those farms farming LPS corals? Always seems to be SPS. And I think there's something to that statement where there's a lot more airtime. There's a lot more airtime for the SPS corals. They're a lot easy to propagate. You know, as you know, you can just snap a branch, glue it to something, or the Solomon way, tie it down to something. But the LPS, you know, you can kind of cut up some of the chalices and some of the lobos and euphilias with cutters, but that's, you know, pretty much mutilation. So it gets a little bit more involved, especially on the coral farms where you want that precision cut to separate out Blastomus corallites or chalice shapes or lobophilia. So if it's not like a moon coral that you can, you know, really kind of snip into little pieces, the SPSs do take priority because you kind of need electricity and the bandsaw and replacement cutting blades to do LPS properly, and Vincent does do that. Neptune's Pot says, have the coral farm any problem with heating problems or rather coral bleaching? So like I said, farming corals out in the wild has some seasonality to it. Overheating is absolutely one of those issues. But as we discussed, the inland coral farm is very thoroughly cooled. I bet you the next time I go there, when I'm getting a little hot, I'm just going to stick my whole arm into the water and just cool myself off, because I bet you he's keeping it like 75 degrees or something really, really frigid like that. This is a great question. Nickwood says, how can we support these types of farms? Buy their stuff, you know. Farmed coral comes on a very predictable disc. It's going to be kind of a lumpy piece of semicircular concrete, you know. And nowadays, especially in Indonesia, it has to have a tag. Now, if you go to your local fish store or something, like that tag might have been removed. I leave mine in for as long as I can stand it, just to have like that bragging rights, I guess. You know, you get a new hat, leave a sticker on. Oh, this is brand new. But yeah, you can, once you start looking for them, unless someone has already chopped them up and put them on new bases, farmed corals from the wild are very recognizable in shape and size, and especially by their base. But if you really want to support the coral farms, tell your store, tell your vendors, ask for the stuff. You know, tell them what you want. And it's one thing to get coral that everyone has, that everyone recognizes. It's kind of like the hype coral. But for me, one of the things that's super fun about farmed corals is by the time they get here, you know, they've had a ride. You know, they're not looking their super bestest unless they've had just like a perfect one-way flight. And some of these brown corals, like they might take a little while to color up. And that's for me, it's like opening up a Christmas present in slow motion. So farm corals are super fun, especially when it's not the super duper hype corals that are commanding crazy prices. So if you see some cheap farm corals, especially acros, buy them, because I guarantee you, they are not taking the time to farm brown corals, right? So if you see a brown farmed acro, especially, get it, because if you get it happy and you let it settle in, it's going to color up. Lucas H commented on how many smaller skimmers they use versus larger ones. Brett Duras says mostly actinics wild. They bring out the colors, but definitely washes out the blues and purples. So one of the things that Vincent does at his coral farm, he's not just farming corals like we would, you know, farm corals in Ohio or something. He's also taking certain corals so rewind. In some of his locations, in farming locations, corals grow fast, right? We're talking about clear, you know, shallow water. It's going to have a lot of light. The coral's going to grow fast, but it might lose some color. So this is why he has very heavy blues. So he can take some of those wild corals, bring them in, juice them up a little bit, get them, you know, aquarium ready. And so that's what he was talking about in that clip, as far as like kind of conditioning some of the corals and coloring them up. So Carrie Apollos Astaroth TV. So how is it now in Bali, Indonesia? Is coral farmers getting to ship corals a lot now? Yes, I do believe all of the coral farmers are firing on all cylinders. As you know, we've all been indoors and we're all hungry for a lot of livestock for our aquariums. But you know, one of the things that's also kind of hard to see in the corals is how much effort goes into the discovery of certain corals and going out and getting fresh broodstock, which I don't think they're really allowed to do anymore. I don't know exactly the logistics of that, but there's a paper trail from the broodstock to the farm, to the indoor coral farm, to being shipped around the world. So it's definitely a never-ending challenge, especially with you fickle reefers always wanting retina burning coral colors, right? So if you want to support the coral farms, buy some of the like normal corals, you know, buy some lobos that are farmed, buy some green stylophora or some pink bird's nests that are farmed. That's one of the ways you can really, really help. All right, let's see if we have a couple more callers. Chrissy says it's all about that base, and that is correct. All right, so I think you guys have learned a lot about corals from the wild and corals from the farm, and then corals from the wild coming into an intermediate facility. This next clip I haven't seen at all. I am a self-professed tepid zoanthid enthusiast. And, I'll have a couple zoanthids here and there, but they are not corals. Okay, let me say that again. Zoanthids are not corals. They are zoanthids. They are a completely different line of reef, aquarium, and coral reef animals. But by many measures, they're not corals. So we went out of our way to reach out to one of the most prolific zoanthid culturists that I know, and that's Darwin over at Legendary Corals. And he's put together a great clip, some real eye candy. And again, I don't know that much about zoanthids, but he's going to tell us about some of the strains that grow the fastest, that grow the slowest, and some of his own tips and tricks and techniques. So let's roll that clip from Legendary Corals.
Hey there, my name is Darwin, and I'm the owner of Legendary Corals. I'm really humbled to be a part of the ReefStock from Home segment, and I've asked to talk about what are easily my favorite corals, zoanthids. So, a quick little history about me and zoanthids. Zoanthids were actually the very first coral that I owned. I remember trading an old light fixture in a Target Plaza for some Rastas, Sunny D's, and Darth Mauls. Once I saw how bright they were and all the colors, I was just super hooked. And their small size was perfect for my little nanocube. There were just so many varieties for me to collect. And being able to physically see their growth by counting each new polyp, how they look like little bouquets of flower, knowing that there's never ending amount of colors out there, it was just, it was addicting. And even now, those same things that pulled me in the first time, over a decade ago, are the reasons why I still love zoas. Anyways, that's just a little background on zoas and how I fell in love with them. Hopefully those tuning in or who are just starting the hobby, or, you're already an aspiring zoa collector, know exactly what I'm talking about. That strange need and excitement to grab and collect these little water polyps and stare at all those tiny details they have. And well, that strange need and excitement over those first 3 Zofrags is how I got to where I am today. Over the past decade of keeping them and seeing the hobby change, I can tell you what's worked for me and my own thoughts on zoas. The first one isn't exactly something like flow, but more so the observation I've come to have that benefits me when it comes to zoas. Let's just dive into it. In the wild, or at least I think anyways, these little encrusting polyps might have been collected in a little nook and cranny, wide out in the open, exposed to high currents, low currents, tide pools, deep waters, low light, high light, muddy water, you name it. Most likely, there's a zoa somewhere in one of those places. Being found in all these different environments means that they all have different preferences. They come in all sorts of body shapes and sizes. Some zoas are small, some are big, some are teeny, and some are gigantic. Some zoas look flat in body shape and some are plump, some get long lashes and others stay compact. I noticed this and eventually started to suspect that maybe all these different body shapes and traits could mean that they're all different species of zoas. I mean, reefers who keep Acroporas can differentiate all the different species based on the skeleton structure, so why should zoas be treated differently with their polyp structure? When zoas are imported, they're just polyps on a piece of rock that I direct chiseled off. There's no story on how and where they're collected, perhaps the Cartier origin, but that's it. So how do I know what it prefers? Observing the body and shape of an unfamiliar zoomorph and linking it back to another zoomorph I know of gives me a really good idea on what to expect. And here's one example. There's a very well-known zoan strain called Pink and Golds. It's known for being one of the fastest growing zoas in the hobby. It's characterized with big polyps and has large clear trunk-like stalks. This characteristic is most apparent when they're kept in low light and they end up stretching. Their polyps also turn more of a drab color when exposed to low light. When you give them really high intense light, the polyps would just become way more flat, all the glitter color would almost condense down, giving it a much more appealing look. The skirts would then get pink on the tips and thus the name, Pink and Golds. Makes a lot of sense. Not too long ago, a zoa came into the hobby called Nirvanas, and I noticed it had very similar physical traits. When I first purchased a zoa, I had a pretty good hunch on how things would turn out. Fast forward a few months, and the Nirvanas end up being extremely fast growing, do a lot and stretch heavily when under, not given enough light, and they would come back down in size and condense with these marvelous glitters of rainbows as coloration. Sound kind of familiar? So when purchasing Zoa for the first time, I try to focus more so on their body and shape rather than their pattern. I use this observation as a starting guide on if I think the Zoa will do well for me, along with a good guess on what its needs are and what to expect out of it. Use this tip as a good starting point with Zoas you're unfamiliar with, since you should be able to see which ones with physical characteristics are already doing well in your own system. Moving on from that little observation tip about Zoas, there's going to be about 5 key things that come to mind when I keep Zoanthids. Their stability, nutrition, flow, lighting, and quarantine. So the next thing I'll go over is stability, which is the greatest strength of any reef tank. Without stability, your reef tank that your Zoa calls home is constantly changing. Zoas can't focus energy on growing and instead spend all their energy adapting to their new environment. The change in environment not only happens through fast parameter swings, but by something we're all a bit guilty of, and that's tinkering. In a short time span, there are way more ways to do harm to your reef tank and fewer things you can do that will benefit your reef. I'm guilty of the same things, and here's one example. Some of you might remember the shady reactor fad where it was all the rage. I decided to try it out on one of my Zoa heavy tanks, thinking my nutrients were really high in there and that every reef tank benefits from Shado. More pods, natural form of filtration, it just sounded like a win-win to me. Fast forward a few weeks, Shado's looking plumpy and green, but my Zoas, they started to pale and shrink in size. They've lost their large plumpy look and vibrance that they once had, and I correlated the decline in health with the shady reactor since that was the only change I made. That shady reactor was really expensive and I didn't want it to go to waste, so I ended up buying more fish to help compensate for the shady reactor. Long story short, the Chaeto and the reactor melted away for reasons I'm told was due to depletion of iron, and eventually I had an empty Chaeto reactor with a tank more heavily stocked with fish than previously. Eventually algae started to kick in and I had to reduce the amount of fish and then increase the cleanup crew. The Zoas in that tank, they were stressed out, closed up, some getting covered in algae, turning pale, you name it. And while all this was happening, Zoas in my other frag tanks that didn't have to deal with my whole shady reactor fiasco, they were fully grown out and ready for a new fragging session. That's just one of the examples where I learned that tinkering is, not always the best thing, and it eventually led to a loss of stability. I experienced firsthand on how important keeping a stable system was for a coral that I thought was pretty much bulletproof. And that shady reactor incident segues perfectly into the second key element for keeping Zoanthids: nutrition. The Zoanthids in my previous story became stressed and pale because the Chaeto was consuming the nutrition that they relied on. In my experience, most Zoanthids benefit from a tank with higher nutrition. Providing higher nutrition can be achieved in many different ways. The simplest way is to have a tank stocked with fish. I mostly keep tanks in my system because they're like the cows of the reefs. They graze algae all day and thus create waste all day. The tank stays clear of algae, and now there's nutrition from the Zoanthids. For those with tanks too small to have tangs, I recommend feeding your tank. You can use solids such as Benepets or Reefroids, but liquid supplements work the best for Zoanthids since they're able to absorb it through their tissue. I personally use Brightwell products, but there are many other brands that are popular. Pick one, underdose the instructions, and see how your tank responds over the course of a few weeks. If there's no adverse side effects such as increase in algae growth, go ahead and increase the dose. Repeat the same process until you eventually reach the suggested dosage on the bottle. This is how I approach products, since I rather let the Zoanthids tell me if they like the product, rather than just hoping that the instructions on the back of a bottle is going to make them happy. I will warn you that when feeding your tank, be sure not to provide more than your tank needs. Yes, the Zoas will love you for all that nutrition, but you're going to run into algae issues. It's a teetering seesaw effect when it comes to pushing the envelope, how much nutrition I can offer Zoanthids, and honestly, sometimes I just get lost in it. I look at how awesome they're doing, and I'm like, Eat up, my precious beauties. Eat till your heart's content, thinking that they're gonna grow up to be big and strong, and this is how I show my love to them. Sort of like when you visit your grandma's and she stuffs everything in your face. But instead of having zoanthids with little round tummies, I instead start filling the bellies of algae. This is when I back off and realize that I'm going overboard. You can definitely keep zoanthids without feeding them or in lower nutrient tanks, but in my experience, I want to recommend it if keeping zoas is one of your long-term main goals. The next key element I want to bring up is flow, and in my opinion, this is the most important thing when it comes to keeping zoanthids. Zoanthids rely very heavily on flow in order to keep detritus off of themselves. As zoanthids grow, they spread the tissue outwards on the surface they're attached to, and eventually little polyps come out that new growth. As exciting as it is to see a new polyp emerge, this also means that a new structure is being formed that now blocks flow from entering around that tissue mat. Once that small frag turns into a colony with dozens of polyps, detritus and other debris is going to settle down and get caught in between each of those polyps. Here's an analogy. Think of it like going to the beach, and the only way to get clean was a small water faucet. You're out having fun, playing beach volleyball, and now you want to clean your head. If you're bald, you've got nothing to worry about, as the dirt's just going to slide right off with minimal or no effort. However, if you've got a head full of hair, you're most likely not getting everything off using that little faucet. You're gonna need to take a full shower with strong running water in order to get anywhere near clean. And now imagine if that water faucet was the only way to wash your head and for some reason you lived on that beach 24/7. After months at a time, more debris is going to pile up, and while that's happening, your hair is also getting longer. But longer hair means more dirt is getting caught. Eventually, you're going to have some awful hair and other skin problems like pimples in your scalp, and who knows what else is going to develop. In that analogy, the zoanthids are the hair, and the tissue mat is the skin. A small frag is like having little to no hair, and debris comes right off with a little bit of flow. A colony is a head full of hair and now has all these polyps that trap detritus. This is why most reefers are able to grow zoanthids frags out very well, but once they reach a certain size, they just tend to melt away. The polyps full of detritus either get zoopox, which in the analogy are the pimples, or they close up or get covered in algae or get infected, and then eventually they just die. As zoanthids grow in size, it's important to give them access to more flow to help remove the detritus stuck in between their polyps. And if you can't increase the flow in the area they're growing, be sure to spot clean them with a turkey baster to blast off all that gunk. Just be sure to siphon it out, or else it'll end up back on them or another coral. Having said that flow is important, it's also my experience that zoanthids can't just be blasted with too much flow in the beginning. A one polyp frag has very little matting, and that thus not much to anchor itself onto the frag plug or rock it's glued on. Too much flow can easily blow it away. However, as I mentioned earlier, they require much less flow to stay healthy, so start small frags off in lower flow, just enough so that the detritus sweeps off of them, and allow them to safely grow and establish a solid foundation. Once grown out, you can place them into an area with stronger flow as a more permanent growing solution. The next key element to keeping zoanthids is lighting. I've tried many different types of lights, from T5s, mix of reef brights, radions, aqua illuminations, China boxes, you name it. I've currently settled down on using Kessels. I found that zoas do best when kept under a more blue focused spectrum. I personally keep them under 100% blues all the time. Whites to me are mainly for aesthetics and for taking photos. Zoanthids are not light demanding corals. They probably don't even get much white spectrum in the natural habitats, so I don't see a need to provide one in a coral farm setting. On a 12-inch tall frag tank, I run my Kessel 360X units at 80% intensity for 10 hours a day, with a mounting height of 24 inches above the waterline. This gives the tank a nice even spread of light that is not too intense. A general rule of thumb for zoas is that it's far safer to keep them in lower light than in higher light. Zoas would physically tell you if they need more light by stretching their stalks. If they receive too much, they may become severely stressed and start to fold inside out, exposing the filaments and shrink intensely. So, always start a Zoa in low light and move them to higher light as needed. Once you found a spot where they're no longer stretching for light, leave them alone. Zoanthids will change in color according to your tank settings over the next few months, and they'll settle down faster if undisturbed. If your zoas are physically doing well and growing, but you want to color them up more, look back into the nutrition. Just be sure to leave your lights the way it is. The last key element to keeping zoanthids is proper inspection and quarantine. Unfortunately, zoas are prone to many pests. They're full of polytoxin, and apparently some little critters find that delicious. Some common zoa-specific pests are zoanthid-eating nudibranchs, zoanthid spiders, and sundial snails. All it takes is one of those pests to make it through a dip, and your years of hard work are at risk. The most common and difficult pests to handle, in my opinion, are zoanthid-eating nudibranchs. Adult and baby nudibranchs don't really die from most dips. They rather just get kind of irritated and fall off. The eggs also don't die from dips. There are guides online on how to spot and treat these critters, but there are a few things I personally do to make sure I don't get them. The first is to inspect every polyp and cranny on any new frag or colony. I then give them a dip, then sit for a few minutes, and then turkey baster them to loosen any unwanted hitchhikers. After the dip, I rinse them in salt water, I inspect them once again, and then I place them in a tank that's separate from the main frag tank. There, they settle down into new homes for a few weeks to a month, and once deemed clean, I will then only move them to a main system. Having the zoas in a separate system makes cleaning and dipping them a breeze, and for those looking to collect and grow zoas, consider a quarantine tank as a security measure for all of your hard work. There's a lot of cheap all-in-one tank systems out there you can purchase either new or used. Just fill that small tank up with water from a water change, toss in some existing media, slap on a light, and you're all set. Doesn't need to be anything fancy, but this one small step is going to save you so much head and heartache. And that's my video segment on how I view and care for zoanthids. I hope that this was at least a bit valuable to those tuning in. Feel free to reach out to me if you'd like to know more info on zoanthids or if I can help with anything else. I try to keep a basic care guides for all the morphs I offer, so if you're curious on how to keep any of them, just swing by my site. Thanks again, Reef Builders, for giving me the opportunity to talk about these cool little corals. Take care and happy reefing.
What an amazing, informative video. You know, there's like 4 or 5 of us right now in the background. We got a couple guys waiting to come on. But when Darwin's video came on, after a little while, it was just quiet. We were all paying very close attention because a lot of the things that Darwin says about zoanthids is just great advice to like all reef keeping, to everything and almost every kind of group of coral. And Darwin really wanted to participate in this, but he had some other event that he had to go to, so he regrets he couldn't be here. Definitely go to legendarycorals.com and check out his stock, or reach out to him on Instagram. Tell him you saw his video, because you could tell from the clip that he worked really hard to put that together. And I actually did not know that Darwin was that thoughtful of a reefer. I haven't had much time to spend with him at the shows, you know, just kind of chit-chatting and talking about stuff. But great, awesome clip. Definitely on the feeding part, I am very guilty of looking at a reef tank and thinking to myself, oh, if there's algae growing, then there's nutrients, then there must be nutrients enough for the coral. But definitely in the last year or so, I realized I've been underfeeding corals like my entire aquarium career. And I think I also would like to say that I wish I could participate in fine detail in the chat as the stream is going on. But we're trying to put these clips together and you know, keep the stream going. So I want to thank everybody for participating in the chat. I'll do my best to answer some of those questions. But having nutrients is not a substitute for feeding. It just really isn't. You got to feed your corals. Everybody who feeds their corals says they probably should be feeding more, and that's how I feel about it. Another great piece of advice that Darwin threw out there was about tinkering. You know, he thought he was going to reduce some of his maintenance by adding a ketomorpha reactor which grew pods and grew Chetomorpha, no problem. But then it starved his zoanthids of nutrients. And so then he added more fish to get more poop from the system. And it's just like, he had the balance. He had it just totally evened out. And that is something I feel take a lot of responsibility for, is tempting and luring people with fancy reef gadgets on reef builders. And to tell you the truth, man, the more I've been doing this, the more I've kind of pulled back from any of that tricky stuff. There's a lot, like smart devices, those are super awesome. But things that promise to reduce your maintenance, like that's not even fun. Like I want a hobby, I want something to do, and mastering the fundamentals and is gonna be way better than having something doing it for you. Like I promise you, because when it fails and then you're kind of not in the loop, you won't really know what's going on. He had a great point about the zoanthid frags versus colonies. And this is probably something that I am guilty of again, because I'm not a hardcore zoanthid keeper. I put everything kind of in high flow, but the one type of zoanthid that I actually do collect are Palithoa grandis, sun polyps. These are big boys, you know, so when you have just 1 2-inch polyp, of course it's great in great flow. But I do have an issue where my mats of sun polyps get a lot of sponge growing in them, and probably every 3 to 6 months I have to get in there and like physically pull sponge out from between the individual polyps. But I think that might be the takeaway, first, second, and third tip for zoanthids for anybody who's interested in zoanthids. It's like, hey, your 1 or 2 polyp frag is going to get a ton of water flow all around it. It's going to do great. As it gets bigger and denser, it's going to choke himself. And I love his tip about spot cleaning, right? Spot feeding, that's been a word in the reef aquarium hobby for forever. But spot cleaning of zoanthids, I think the only coral I spot clean here is my big Setosa, because it's big and it's branchy and there's a lot of stuff that settles out. And I instinctively spot clean that one, but it never occurred to me to spot clean my zoanthids. So I have a lot of basters. I am going to be applying that. Another thing that he mentions is we treat pretty much all zoanthids the same. And zoanthids can occur from like right at the tide line to on the reef to very deep to like abyssal depth where we're talking about totally different groups of zoanthids. And that's might be one of the biggest problems with zoanthids as far as aquariums are concerned. We don't have any species of zoanthids. You have Zoanthus, Palithoa, Protopalithoa, and that's pretty much it. So we don't, this is one of those groups that like, it's hard to keep track of all the funky made up over the top coral names. But with zoanthids, if you're familiar with one group, even if the color's a little bit different, it's not gonna, there's not gonna be different requirements, right? So if you're really familiar with Utter Chaos, you're probably gonna do okay with Darth Mauls and vice versa. What he said about the white light, and white light, again, I'm just trying to encourage people to enjoy their tanks in a more natural way. I do have a Scalimia tank. I have an LPS aquarium that has 0 white diodes on it. It gets 0 white light. Those corals just, you know, they're always deeper. They're always kind of deeper, a little bit bluer. And same can kind of be said for the zoanthids. It's like, yeah, zoanthids are a lot more enjoyable under blue light. Those chromatic pigments I was talking about are lost on our LPS corals and our SPS corals. And another great tip from Darwin. Like I'm going to be re-watching this clip. We'll probably re-upload it in its own, maybe with a little bit of follow-up from him. But overdoing it, you know, especially I'm guilty again when my corals are doing awesome. Like I want to push them. I want to push them even a little bit more. I want to feed a little bit more. I want to flow. I want to light a little bit more. But that's, you know, when some restraint is going to benefit you more than effort, right? And I think that everything Darwin said about zoanthids really applies to like a broad group of coral. So I would like to take some questions now. I don't remember who said it, but it was a great question because I have a great answer for it. I want to say it was Jonah W. He asked me what my first coral was. And this is not kind of related to this discussion per se, But my first reef tank came, like I bought it off the Carolina Trader. So that was Craigslist in a newspaper form back in 1995. And it came with corals, right? I think it came with bubble coral, some mushrooms, some zoanthids, definitely was a bubble coral, and a leather coral. But the first coral I ever bought is what I consider to be my coral, my first coral. I worked at an aquarium store, and it was around Valentine's Day, 1996. I was 14, 15. I bought a blue heart-shaped Turbinaria pagoda cup coral. And no doubt that has influenced how I feel and how much I respect the broader group of Turbinarias. Okay. Some more questions. Okay, so Luis Heredia says, damn, I never knew zoanthids weren't corals. I always learn something new from reef builders. And they're not technically corals, but almost everything applies to them, except for the part that they are very toxic, which most corals aren't. They're not going to poison you. Peter C says, with feeding zoos, do they prefer amino acid or granular coral food? Those are two different things. I add amino acids to all my tanks, and I feed all my tanks. So amino acid is part of the supplementation, but coral food, particulate coral food is important for almost everything. My zoos all seem to grow strong for about a year and fade off. Why? Now, if you watch the entire clip, you're probably wondering about spot cleaning and the mat that your corals develop over time. And zoanthid frags do very well when they're smaller, and as they get bigger, they start choking themselves out. And again, that's true for a lot of corals, but probably even more of zoanthids because they can grow really, really tight. So Micah McCloskey says, I love my zoos, but they seem to grow very slowly. Is there a trick to get them to grow faster? If your conditions are correct, food is probably the limiting factor that is holding back your zoanthids, even if you have some nutrients in the water like feeding. But again, you got to go back to don't overdo it. Feed them a little bit once a week. Darwin had some great advice. Do something for a little while. He said, even he said, it's like, it doesn't even matter what coral food you use. It doesn't matter what additives you use. Just underdose, underfeed, and then watch it. And you'll, through observation, this is the important part of the hobby. Observation, that is most of it, not the knowledge, but watching your tank when it comes to dosing and changes and feeding. So if your corals haven't been growing for a little bit, definitely try a little bit more food. Jake Birch says, what's the best way to keep the Zofrags plugs clean of algae? I would say, it's a combination of things. Don't introduce algae in the first place. If you never introduce Bryopsis or Valonia in your tank, it's not going to magically appear. 2, cleanup crew. Certain critters are better at picking off the plugs than others. I would confer with your local fish store about what's available in your area. And 3, feed your zoanthids, but keep the water clean. What else? Peter C says, I always have issues fragging zoos. They never stick correctly with glue. Is there a better method? So when you're fragging zoanthids, unlike a lot of other corals, you don't want to glue the coral directly. You want part of that mat. You want that zoanthid to encrust onto something, and then you're going to cut that and glue it onto something else, because the flesh of zoanthids is it's a little bit leathery, but also slimy. So you're not going to be able, in most cases, to glue the coral directly to a base. You want to get that coral to encrust onto something and then cut that something and glue it around. So I hope that answers your question. Good question for Brett Durda. Good recommendation on dosing lower than directions and watching your corals. It's all about observation. Artivore says, egg crate seems like a great, easy way to start zoo garden that's easy to frag apart. This is also true. Okay, so I think we have a really important clip coming up. This is going to be a little bit more lean forward with a little bit more science. Going to keep your thinking hat on. This is probably part of a train of thought that has been moving through the reef aquarium hobby for like 30, 40 years, and that is keeping your pH high. There's a lot of people who, just like everything else in life, you think you want to lose weight, look out for that weight loss supplement. If you want to, grow hair, go buy a snake oil. If you have other problems in your life, maybe there's a pill for that. But pH is unquestionably one of the most important. No, it's not one. It is the driving parameter for the crystallization of baragonite crystals. Simply put, coral growth, right? So higher pH equals higher coral growth. We already know about ocean acidification. That's a problem. The ocean is more acidic now than when I started reefing. That just blows my mind. When I started reefing, the ocean pH was generally about 8.2. And now it's 8.1. So no wonder corals are growing slower and all kinds of bad stuff are going. So there's a lot of ways to raise your pH. I get a lot of evaporation up here at a mile of altitude and really dry, thin air. So I can dose a lot of kalkwasser, man. I'm a kalkwasser fiend. But I think I'm starting to hit some of those limits of how much I can dose just based on evaporation. And if you're at sea level or in someplace humid at sea level, you probably don't evaporate more than just a few tablespoons per day, and you can't add kalkwasser like someone who evaporates a lot more. For that, there's a new technique that our good buddy Chris Meckley is going to talk about. Now, I want to preface this by saying this is a professional approach, but we're going to segue into a discussion with Jeremy Howell of Brightwell about a product that they are continually refining to bring this technique to the average aquarist. So let's see what Chris Meckley has to say about keeping pH very high.
Hello, my name is Chris Meckley from ACI Aquaculture. I want to thank Jake Adams and Nicole and Ryan for having me on a second time here to do the ReefStock at home. This topic this time is going to be tips from a coral farmer that will help to enhance your growth and your colors of your corals, mainly through boosting your pH. So let's get into this here real quick. There's a lot of things, a lot of times people say you don't chase your pH. Here at ACI, we never did. We never chased our pH. We never even really monitored it. And when a year ago, or a little bit more than a year ago, when we put on monitoring systems that actually showed our pH on a daily basis, it was one of the things that started bothering me. And I said, we got to do something about this because, it's a problem if, in my opinion, if we're not keeping these animals in the water, that's the best we can possibly make it, because the water they came from was, an 8.3 pH, maybe a little bit lower now, but, night and day, the pH doesn't really change a whole lot. So we have fluctuations in our own aquariums because of the fact that we live in a box, and we don't have outside air constantly being, recycling through our homes unless it's springtime or, we don't have our heat on or we don't have our AC on and we can open our windows. And I hear it all the time where when people have their house opened up, their pH in their system rises. And naturally so, because there's less carbon dioxide in your air that's in your home at that point in time. So some of the things that affect your aquarium's pH is the amount of CO2 that is being put into your aquarium through your protein skimmer, or just from the ambient air being absorbed into the water. So with all of the extra CO2 that's in a lot of homes, a lot of times people try to, they have a hard time keeping their pH above. I mean, some people have problems with like 8.09, 8.9, or 8.1. Some people have it below 8, and their tanks look beautiful, but what's it doing to the corals? And that's what my whole thing was. So when they say don't chase your pH, I'm going to turn that around and say, let's chase your pH, because what we found is really, really amazing. It makes things much simpler when it comes down to water parameters, with your pH being closer to natural seawater levels. So I want to talk about what is the most important parts of your reef aquarium. Everybody knows these things, I always say there's three major things you look at in your reef tank to make sure you're going to have a good environment for your corals that you are caring for. It's light, flow, and water parameters. And light and flow, most people have that kind of dialed in. Water parameters has always been an issue. You're constantly dosing. What do you dose? How much do you dose? And the best thing that I can say is, if you have a regimen that you use, stick with it. And one of the things that's very important is if you're taking advice on a forum or from 15 or 20 different people on how to maintain your parameters, you're doing yourself an injustice. Why don't you, my opinion is you find somebody that you trust, that you knows what they're doing, and take the advice from them and use their method. And it doesn't mean you can't create your own method, because you're in a different environment than what we are in. And from anybody else, every aquarium is different, but most applications, if it works for somebody else, it will work for you. So I think it's very important to take advice from one, maybe two other people. It's just mixing everything up tends to be a cluster and can cause you a lot of anguish in the long run, and cost animals their lives because things are being mixed up, and sometimes those two methods will not mix well and give you results that you're looking for. So the most important thing to me right now is maintaining my water parameters. And when we started monitoring our water level, our water pH, alkalinity, calcium, magnesium, I can monitor my pH anytime I want to. We get readings from our control system in our Trident every 4 or every 6 hours. Love that. It turned me into more of a geek than what I was before. But we were having issues with, my calcium reactor was rated for 5,000 gallons of water, and we're on 2,200 gallons of water. And why am I running the maximum amount of water through my calcium reactor, and I'm still having a hard time keeping my alkalinity stabilized, and my magnesium and my calcium? And learning a lot about chemistry, something that I never really talked about, because it was always, don't chase your pH. Well, chase your pH, folks, because what it will do for your system will blow your mind. It actually will make your alkalinity stay more stable. Your calcium will stay more stable. Your magnesium will stay more stable. And it's all because it's closer to the natural seawater, and you have ionic balance that will be achieved in time. We achieved it with what we're doing in about 2 months. And then I recalibrated my pH probes, and it didn't calibrate properly, and now I'm back to square one almost. But I'm getting back to where I was, and it's really amazing just to watch things and how they go. But what happens is, when you have your pH low, you have a lot of carbon dioxide that's in your system. What happens is it creates a mild acid called carbonic acid. Carbonic acid will break apart carbonates, and it will cause issues with pH being low, and it will also cause your alkalinity to fall out of solution quite quickly. So we chase our alkalinity in almost every scenario in everybody's aquarium. You're constantly dosing alkalinity buffer. Well, if you get your pH up by either using calcium hydroxide or kalkwasser, which is what I recommend everybody use, and your last resort will be kind of what I'm going to talk about here in a few minutes. But I don't even recommend it. I won't tell anybody how to use this stuff because it's too scary. It's too caustic. It's dangerous compound that not just anybody should get their hands on. And it's why you don't see this stuff in an aquarium product with any real value to it or concentration, because it is very, very nasty. I mean, I put a hazmat type suit on to mix the stuff up from the flakes that we get, which is pure potassium hydroxide. 99.5 to 99.7% pure is what we use. The impurities in potassium hydroxide, it can be really toxic. So yeah, it has to be as pure as you can possibly get your hands on, or you can have issues. But dosing kalkwasser will be a huge thing for boosting your pH. But even before you start doing kalkwasser, there's a couple of things you can do that most people don't think about for helping your pH. And one of them is to try to get outside air into your protein skimmer. In a lot of cases, you can't do that. You're in the middle of the house, you're in the basement. If you're in the basement, you can always, put it out a window, an air line out a window so it can pull the air in so that it can give you fresh air from the outside, which will help, believe it or not, help raise your pH up, because in your home you have more CO2 buildup because it's not having as much outside air exchange unless your windows are open, your doors are open, and it's beautiful outside. So bringing the outside air in will definitely help. If that doesn't get you to where you want to be, then, you know, figure out what your evaporation rate is on your aquarium and get either a caulk stir and have it auto top off, or dose it, which is what I recommend. Set rules if you can do that, if you have the right equipment. So that way it doesn't, once your pH gets to the point where you want it to, it stops dosing the calcium hydroxide. That way your pH then can naturally rise, which will happen in any aquarium, because as soon as your lights go out, the coral stop photosynthesizing, which means they're not taking up the carbon dioxide that is in the water column. And when your lights are on, the coral start photosynthesizing, and any plant life that's in there will photosynthesize, which will use up carbon dioxide, which is the reason why you have a pH rise when your lights are on. So I don't recommend that it get dosed unless it's necessary while your lights are on, because in most cases your pH will naturally go up a certain amount. In our system, it goes up 0.2, but we're a little bit different. You know, in 2,200 gallons, we have more biomass in there than most people could possibly imagine, with all the fragments and all the mother colonies that we have growing. But what is better for you for monitoring everything is just see where you are after your pH peaks, and then see where you are with your valley of your pH. So whatever your highest value is, and it's not at 8.3, you want to get it there. So dosing the amount of calcium hydroxide or kalkvasser in your system to the evaporation, you can achieve a higher pH, and in some cases it still will not get you to where you need it to be. That is where we were. We were having to dose up to 30 gallons of calcium hydroxide or kalkvasser. That's why I stopped doing it, because it was continuously chasing my salinity, because kalkvasser is mixed in RO water, and the more you put in, the lower your salinity is going to go, your specific gravity. So we had to come up with another way. The other way that we came up with was the potassium hydroxide. The potassium hydroxide, again, very, very caustic. My guys were laughing at me. They called me the mad scientist when I started mixing it the first time. It's really bad. They use it to melt the flesh off of bones at butcher shops, if that says anything. They also use it to etch glass. So if you have sharp edges on glass, this stuff will dissolve that. So it'll even break down glass in time. It'll break down plastic containers in time. So part of the reason why you don't see it as an aquarium product is because it's really, really just not for everybody to play around with. I mean, it can really do some major damage to your skin, and, you know, again, melt the flesh right off of it. I mean, I got some 1/3 solution on my thumb, and it messed my thumb up for about 2 months, and that was at 1/3 of max concentration in RO water. And really opened my eyes. It wasn't intentional at all. I was just swapping out a bucket, and I touched the silicone line that was going down in, and it had some on it, and that little bit just really was bad. I mean, my fingers cracked, they bled. Kind of freaked me out a little bit, but wasn't really a whole lot different than my hands get anyhow with them being in salt water all the time. It just made it even worse. But so with potassium hydroxide, it's so potent that in 2,200 gallons, we were literally at max concentration. We were dosing 1 drop every 3 seconds. We started that back in November, beginning of November. We figured out how much we had to put in the system by just trial and error, and we actually figured this dosing out all on our own. And, you know, I got a lot of flack for it, saying you're crazy, you're nuts, you just did it in your farm system, you could have wiped out everything. You know, yes, I could have, but I never do anything too extreme until I know what I'm doing. And I didn't know a darn thing about this stuff. And, you know, the 1 drop every 3 seconds, I actually laughed at that. I'm like, what's that going to do to a 2,200 gallon system? Well, I learned quickly what it can do. My pH in that system was right around 8.13 at the peak. We started dripping this, it was like 11 a.m. and it wasn't at the peak. But by the time we got the peak, after dripping it, the peak is at 2:30 every day, which is when the first set of metal halides goes off. That's when the pH will start to fall slowly. So when we were at our peak with the 1 drop every 3 seconds, we were at 8.35. And that was the first time I saw my pH that high. So then I kind of tweaked the dosing from there and figured out what we needed to do. And we did it, manually without being on a dosing pump for another week until I felt comfortable that my dosing was going to be correct. And then we put the program in and we started dosing it. And of course, I'm like looking at my phone every 15 minutes, checking out my pH, trying to figure out if everything's going okay. And it turned out that the dosing was perfect. It didn't fall past a certain point, and that was huge for us. So one of the things that is that we noticed literally within the first 3 days was we actually were in the process of doing fragging mother colonies of Acroporas. And, we have kind of a regiment that we do. We frag the corals and we hold those frags on the plugs for at that point, it was 8 weeks before they were marketable, and for me to be happy with them, to offer them up for sale to our customers. And after the we did it on Thursday. I came in on Monday when the corals were fragged on Thursday, came in on a Monday, and everybody knows our pink panther. It's an absolutely stunning coral. Jake's got a piece of it. I've got now 3 mother colonies of it, but we fragged them down, and sure enough, on Monday, 3 days later, all the tissue had grown back over the cuts, and we had the very faint spot where a new axial coral light was growing. And my eyes lit up. I was like, what is that? That's insane. And then all the frags that we had made had already started a little bit of puddling onto the glue that held the frag to the plug. And I'm getting all excited. It's amazing what we're seeing. And then I actually got a little worried because we were doing potassium hydroxide dosing, and I was not doing any Kalkwasser at this time. So I was monitoring my potassium levels. Well, they started creeping up, but we were dosing 3 liters of potassium hydroxide. So I'm like, okay, we got to figure something else out, because if not, my potassium level is going to go through the roof, and that's going to be a problem as well. So that's when we incorporated the calcium hydroxide and the potassium hydroxide at nighttime, when the pH is falling to its deepest valley, so that it can help it stay very, very close to the natural seawater levels. And we've got it kind of dialed in, and it's been really exciting. Okay, so now, bottom line with boosting your pH and why you should do it. One, I talked about it a few seconds ago with the growth. We took from frag, mounted on a plug, it's a sellable, from 8 weeks to about 5.5 weeks. Blows my mind. I mean, that is huge amount of growth difference with just the pH being boosted. And the potassium being added and keeping the potassium levels up made a huge difference as well. It just made every single coral in the system glow. I mean, reds, blues, purples, corals that were stagnant in growth, that did not do much of anything. All of a sudden, about a month and a half into it, I started noticing we were getting, growth on some of these corals that we've had for over 2 years. One of them was a Blastomusa. The Blastomusa single polyp that we saved, it was absolutely gorgeous. No babies, no growth, no nothing, just a happy, healthy coral. So I thought, pH boosted. All of a sudden, around the base of that polyp, we had babies, between, I don't know, I say 100, but it's not even close to that, but it just looks like so many, because there's all these little itty bitty specks of polyps that are starting to form. And it blows my mind, because, it took just boosting my pH for all of a sudden that coral to start doing something. Is that what it was? I think it was, because we've got other corals like Fabius and Acanthastria echinatus that really were stagnant. They weren't doing a whole lot. There, all of a sudden, the growth on them just went nuts. And I'm going to have some corals in the market that I've been just saying, how are we going to even make this marketable as a wholesaler, because they just don't grow fast enough. Well, within the past 3 months, we went from being, double, triple polyp Fabia frags to fully down encrusting now onto the plugs with all kinds of new polyps. And, I'm going to keep following up with this. I'd love to show some, we're doing shots of the corals that we're noticing the growth on. And eventually we're going to put something out that'll show you all, what happened and over what period of time, which is going to, make everybody just excited about it, because, I love corals, and if I can figure out how to make them happier, that's what we're going to do. And the bottom line here, chase your pH. I recommend it highly, but do it in the right way. Don't go crazy, take things slowly, learn how to do it, because it can really mess things up if you do it too quickly. Your alkalinity will rise, but that's natural. Once your pH is stabilized at a higher pH for, it took 2 months for us, everything went back down to where it was supposed to be and leveled off without doing anything to the systems. My calcium reactor started running again. And bottom line, it was just worth every bit of stress it put me through. And now I'm able to tell reefers some things that they might not have already known. So this is all about making sure everybody understands their water chemistry and the fact that you chase your alkalinity when you really don't. You really need to chase your pH, because your alkalinity will just fall into place a lot easier and you won't be dosing nearly as much. So one thing that costs you a little bit of money saves you money elsewhere, also saves you a lot of anguish, plus your corals will be much happier. So I'd like to end this with saying, if you have any questions, we got a short segment here after this that I'm happy to answer any questions you have. I'm sure Jake's going to have plenty, and I'm sure we could go longer than the allotted time, but you can always private message me on Facebook or on ACI Aquaculture's Facebook page, and or email us at info@ACI Aquaculture, and we'll happily help you in any way, shape, or form so that you can achieve your goals for growing your corals faster and making them more beautiful than you've ever seen them. So again, my name is Chris Meckley from ACI Aquaculture, and I hope you enjoyed this.
So that was more of an advanced expert look at one of the aspects of reef aquarium chemistry that we all kind of fundamentally know is really, really important. But I don't think it's been giving nearly as much attention as calcium, magnesium, and alkalinity. Devin Rich popped in from Reef Dudes, and David Mice, I want to say hi to those guys, but he mentioned that dosing kalkwasser or calcium hydroxide raises your alkalinity, but it doesn't. It doesn't actually raise your alkalinity. It prevents your alkalinity from dropping, and if you're still dosing as much as you did, then you're boosting your alkalinity because it's not being depleted nearly as much. There is a lot of things you can do to reduce the reduce the CO2 in your aquarium. You can have an algae scrubber, which everyone calls a refugium these days, but they're not. You can have your protein skimmer pulling in air from outside. I think more recently, this has been around for like 10 years, but more recently, people have really gotten into using CO2 scrubbing media to absorb the CO2 going into the protein skimmer. I'm not sure how effective that is in the long term. I feel like it'd be way easier to pull in CO2 from the outside air. But Chris had some really great points about we all have corals that stagnate. You know your chemistry is right. You know you're feeding well. They're getting good flow. They're getting good light. And somehow we've all gotten okay. We've become okay with their pH of being 7.7, 7.8, up to 8.0, 8.1. And what I thought was curious about, something that Chris mentioned many, many times was natural seawater. And what he's doing is actually much higher than natural seawater, because in the ocean have become acidified. So I think the global average is closer to 8.1. But another question was how high, I think it was Billy D, how high is too high? I don't know what too high is, but I've comfortably been in the 8.4 to 8.5 range. And that's when you're really going to see the benefits of really boosting your pH. And Chris had another great point is one of the commandments of reef keeping for 10, 15 years has been don't chase the numbers, don't chase the chemistry, don't chase the numbers. But pH has such a wide overarching effect on everything else that is one good number to chase. The only reason not to chase it is one thing I tell people is like, there's been times where I've taken the kalkwasser drip off of my tank because the corals were growing so fast that it made it unmanageable to keep up with the calcium, the alkalinity, and the magnesium. So you're really turning your reef tank into overdrive. And when you boost that pH, you need more calcium, more alkalinity, more magnesium. If you have a tank that's really heavily populated with stony corals. Jonah Weidenbaum says, what is a good way to measure your pH level? And to be honest, man, nowadays you can get like a basic pH pen off of Amazon for like $10, $15, $20. I use a slightly fancier one from Hannah, which is Bluetooth, so I connect it to my phone and I can log and see everything. It's a little bit more accurate. But you really want a digital option for your pH. Luis Aceves says, winter in Colorado is brutal on my pH. Tips on using calc with my alk and calcium dosing. Man, I don't know what to tell you, but like running an RO tubing line to the outside, that's going to buy you like 0.2, just said and done. No media that you have to exchange, no funky stuff that you have to do. All right, so we actually have a guest for this one. Let's bring on Chris so he can tell us a little bit more about what he's doing. Chris, what's going on, man? Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me on, guys. It's always good to talk about reefing.
So what got you started on this path of exploration of pH in your systems?
Well, honestly, I think it was you and me having a chat about it back in, I don't know, right about the time the pandemic started. And I always knew it was something I had to figure out and had to do. And because of the environment that we're in, it was difficult to figure out what was the necessary ways of going about it, because we are in an open air environment. And it's not like I can just run an airline or a tubing outside, because we are outside basically. And with all of what we had to dose with Kalkwasser, it was like 30 gallons a day. And I just wasn't evaporating that much in the humid environment we are here in Florida. So after talking to you, and you mentioned some things, and then I said, So then I talked to a friend of mine, and he came up with this idea and got me pure potassium hydroxide, and mixed it up and very cautiously, and said 1 drop every 5 seconds, and I ended up tweaking it to 1 drop every 3, and here we are today, still having fun playing around with it, and everything's been really, really good. So yeah, you're the one that kind of triggered it more so.
One thing I want to point out to our viewers is, like, if your corals are growing fast enough for your needs, don't change the pH. If you have a tank full of LPS and acanthos and bubble corals and stuff is growing fine, don't worry about what we're saying, okay? Not at all. Just disregard everything. But if you want, Chris is a coral farmer, right? He really farms and cultures corals a lot. And so, he does have a bottom line and an end game to grow corals as much as possible. On the flip side, if you're an SPS keeper, corals, the small polyp stony corals, they look their best when they're growing their fastest. So with that in mind, tell us a little bit about puddling, because that's a term that I'm going to steal from you, puddling. Tell us what that means when you say corals are puddling.
Okay, I always called it puddling when an acro was, especially an Acropora or actually any coral, when it starts to puddle onto the plug, meaning that it's grown so much that where it was originally cut, and even just the glue that you glued it down with, I call it puddling over top of the glue and onto the plug. It's basically the growth rate that you can see. So they can puddle slower, they can puddle fast. And as of right now, the way things are going in the farm, acro frags puddle quite quickly, and to watch them just grow across the plug, it just was a term that started using a while ago, actually many years ago. We called it puddling.
That relates to the speed, right? Because when corals are growing slowly and they're encrusting their bases and they do it slowly, it's not impressive. But when you see a coral like an SPS coral or an encrusting coral grow so fast that the skeleton is moving almost day by day, that's when like the whole puddling feeling comes around. That's a really good difference between like just puddling and regular encrusting.
Yeah, no, I see exactly what you're saying there. But then, yeah, when they puddle and the growth is so fast, like the tissue, you can see if you look closely where the tissue is, but there might not be any corallites, and it might be on, you know, an acro, like an eighth of an inch to a quarter of an inch away from the main base, and it's clear. And when it finally starts to get that axial or the little corallite starting to grow, or zooxanthellae starts coming into it, it's just really amazing to see. As the faster they grow, the more they would say puddle. And if you get your pH boosted and you actually just observe that aspect of growth, it kind of blow your mind how things really can go. It's
What was your pH at historically before you did any of this? What was it on a typical day?
Peak was at 8.13. Valley was down as low as 7.85.
And now what's your range?
Now it doesn't fall below 8.27, and it peaks, depends on the day, and that depends on the temperature outside. I mean, there's so many things and factors that determine what the peak and the valley is going to be, because we are in kind of an open air environment. It can be anywhere from like 8.2, like it was today, because it was, I don't know if it was because it was cooler out or what it was, but it peaks as high as 8.5. And that's
so this is a good time to explain that the pH scale is logarithmic. So a pH of 9.0 is 10 times more alkaline than a pH of 8.0. So those 0.1 increments, they really matter a lot. It seems like just like a little difference, but now your low is higher than your previous high, right? Because you said usually it was like, oh, it would max out at 8.1. Now it bottoms out at 8.2. That's a huge difference for the coral.
Yeah, 8.27. The only reason it bottoms out at 8.27 is because that's when our potassium hydroxide starts to kick in and dose. If I just allowed the calcium hydroxide to dose, it would literally, I did the experiment with it. It literally would go all the way down to 8.18 overnight. And then it just takes, you know, and it continuously doses. That's why we had such a problem with just using calcium hydroxide, because it was just diluting the water so much that I was constantly chasing my specific gravity or salinity. And the potassium hydroxide gave us that edge that we needed to keep it from falling that much farther. And you mentioned about you know, the pH on an LPS tank. Something that we did learn, and this is something that's a whole new topic that we think we're creating in our system with all of the hydroxides that we're putting in. There's a nutrient that really is not even talked about or heard about, and there's very little about it, information about it. It's called phosphonate. And phosphonate is phosphates with hydroxides attached to it. And with all the hydroxides that we're adding and the small amount of phosphates that are in the water, are we creating phosphonate? We have no way of testing it. And I've got somebody that's going to actually be able to test phosphonate for me, hopefully within the next 2 weeks, and to see what the difference between my systems that are my import systems that we don't have any pH boosting going on them as of right now, because I'm still experimenting with the farm, and what the difference with the phosphonate level is in the farm. Because the study that was done in Indonesia, the depth of water determines on the level of phosphonate in the water. And is that a nutrient that we're lacking in our aquarium? We don't know, but it's something I'm very curious about since we're doing all this hydroxide dosing.
So I have a two-part question for you. One, some of your fast-growing corals started growing supernaturally fast, where you frag them on a Friday, and on a Monday, they would have so many more axial tips, new tips, than you were used to. So tell us about that.
I never ever saw in a 3-day period of time from the time we frag a coral, 3 days later, having tissue completely grown over where the cuts were. And that's what blew my mind. Is normally it's a week before we started really seeing it fully grow back over where the cut was and an axial start to form. This 3-day thing just was, I mean, I don't know if anybody else can tell me that they've seen anything like that, but it was very new to me. And we used to get
I've
sometimes
seen it with wild corals. I've seen it with frag corals in the wild where pH is very stable.
I was always used to some discoloring starting to happen where that cut was, where you'd see just a real faint tan look where there might have been a little algae starting to grow before that tissue fully, encrusted back over the cuts. But this was so quick that there was no chance for any algae to start growing because literally the pink panther was about a cut about that big and about, I don't know, what was that? Not even a quarter of an inch, maybe 3/8 of an inch, about an inch and a half long. And that was completely covered over with multiple faint spots of axials growing on it, which was, again, it blew my mind. And put a big smile on my face, because that means my corals are growing faster and they're happier. So that just makes it better for everybody when it comes down to it to be able to get our corals in stock.
And now another group of corals, like I never would have thought that Blastomus wellsi would be culturable. Like I've almost never bought full normal Blastomuses because it's like it's a coral you look at and maybe you can hope for a couple coralites per year on a colony, but you're telling me that, or you're telling us that when you raise the pH, you saw their Blastomuses wake up, and now you can actually farm those.
I don't know, Jake. I mean, I'm hoping that we can, because the one that I have that we literally had for probably 2, maybe 3 years that I'm just I didn't get rid of it. Just a gorgeous piece of coral, and something had to start happening with it. And literally in the last 3 months, I couldn't find the photos of that of the babies that we noticed growing on it. Unfortunately for the video here, just was busy this week and didn't get a chance to put it together like I wanted to. But when I pick up the coral and hang it upside down and just kind of see the polyp hanging, the babies around the base of that polyp, I've never seen it. And in all the years we've had that coral, there was never any babies, but they were just tiny little specks about the size of a pinhead or smaller that you can see were forming. I will get photos of it. I know you'll enjoy seeing the photos of it as soon as I can get it, because it blows my mind that I actually see growth out of this coral. Will it last? I hope so, because Blastomuses, as we all knew in the past, they don't grow that fast, and hopefully this would be a game changer for that.
So I think there's kind of 2 parts to what you shared with us. One of them is like pH is absolutely the bomb, and we should be raising our pH and really working harder to raise that pH. Would you agree?
Yes, 100%.
And then the other part is that there's a lot of ways to raise that pH. Open up some windows, bring in air from the outside, run the refugium, do some kalkwasser. But let's wrap you up by hammering home how dangerous it is what you're doing. The chemical that you're working with, also known as drain cleaner, potassium hydroxide, used to dissolve and etch a bunch of things. So tell our viewers why they shouldn't do what you're doing, so we can talk to Jeremy at Brightwell and talk about what they're bringing on the market that's kind of like what you're doing.
I can't stress it enough. I mean, where I got this stuff from, I was told I was getting it in a liquid form, and I said, no, I'm not paying for more water to be shipped. I pay for enough water to be shipped as an importer. I'm smart enough to understand that this stuff is really nasty, and I will do every precaution I possibly can. So it is so caustic. I can't stress it enough. It's not something that you should be playing around with. And if you do decide to be brave and get your hands on any of it, you have to be very, very mindful as to what this stuff can do to you. I mean, you need to be wearing gloves. You need to be wearing goggles, a mask, an N95 mask. I mean, if it's in a dry form and you don't realize that there's dust when you dump it onto your scale to weigh it out or whatever, and you breathe that dust in, you're messing yourself up and you're possibly going to the hospital. And if it gets in your eyes, you're possibly going blind. I mean, it's that bad.
We're talking about permanent damage, right? We're talking about permanent damage, not temporary discomfort. This is permanent scarring, damage, blindness. Don't do it. I mean, let us tweak with the formulas. But don't really do it yourself. And just like Darwin said, just if you have something like this product, use this very slowly on your tanks. Your system is what, thousands of gallons? You're talking about drop every few seconds?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, you can nuke your whole entire system if something happens and you accidentally spill this stuff in your aquarium. I mean, you were talking about pH of 9 being 10 times what a pH of 8 is. Well, imagine something that's a pH of 20. I mean, it'll
14.
melt the flesh right off your skin. What, potassium hydroxide in max concentration?
Scale only goes up to 14.
I don't know. I was just throwing a number out there because I had no idea. Really.
14 is the max.
But I mean, at a pH of that high, it gets so bad that, I mean, my thumb literally took 2 months before it stopped the cracking and bleeding. Now my hands get bad anyhow from salt water, and I don't always wear gloves, and it dries my fingers out. But this was just a small little amount that was accidentally got on my finger because I was complacent, and I touched the tubing that was inside of it. This stuff will actually break apart and make a plastic bucket crumble. It can't be stored in even glass for very long. It'll eventually crumble. So they store sulfuric acid in glass for decades, if I remember correctly. This stuff breaks glass apart. So just whatever you do, don't be...
So, we have to get to our next guest, but I really want to thank you for your contributions, which point at the benefits and the improvements in coral growth by boosting your pH. Don't do what Chris does. Just enjoy the results. So definitely follow AC Aquaculture. I think he's probably most prolific on Facebook, maybe a little bit on Instagram. But this guy has a different way of sourcing and growing his corals. Chris, thank you so much for tuning in. I know a lot of people are gonna, there's products that say for professional use. Those are safe. This is not even safe, right? But
no.
Thank you for tuning in, Chris. I'll talk to you very soon. And our next guest, Jeremy Howell from Brightwell Aquatics, is going to talk to us about a product that Brightwell is continually refining the formula of to start taking advantage of some of these benefits of boosted pH. Where's Jeremy at? I don't see him. Jeremy, what's up, man? How's it going? I can't hear you. Can we hear Jeremy? Did Jeremy's headset die? I'm gonna give Jeremy a second to sort that out while I answer some questions. Peter C says, will dripping a Cal X effluent line in the skimmer help raise the pH of the effluent? Yes, but you don't want to run your effluent directly into your protein skimmer. You want to put it into a broader volume of water, because if you drive that right into your protein skimmer, you will get precipitation, lime deposits on your protein skimmer pump, and that is going to lead to a lot more maintenance or breakdown. So I always encourage people, like, take your calcium reactor effluent and don't put it directly into your protein skimmer. Let it go into a little bit of a volume of water to dilute down a little bit, and then your protein skimmer can process that out. Jimpex asks, would using an ozonizer work in improving air and pH? So ozone is one of those things that is also borderline professional use. There's a reason that it's kind of fallen out of favor in the broader aquarium hobby. It's excellent at sterilizing aquarium water, keeping it super clear. I'm pretty confident that there's some like ancillary effects related to pH, but I don't know a direct ozone to pH connection off the top of my head. What else? Should we be careful about minimizing the pH peaks and valleys? Asks Gabe's Reef Tampa. Just like everything else, we don't want our big swings of anything. I'd say temperature would probably be one of the better, more important ones. I think most tanks, whether they're running low or running high, generally have a range of 0.2. So 7.8 to 8.0, 8.0 to 8.2. That is only going to change with kind of like the livestock in your tank. So it can't, there's just not much room for the pH to swing, say, from 7.5 to 8.5. But I don't think our fish or corals would like it too much. But like I said, historically, it's within a 0.2 or 0.3 range. Lucas H says, this may have changed my mind on pH. I didn't think it mattered that much. Again, I want to say to Lucas, we're going to bring Jeremy on in just one moment. Chris is a coral farmer, right? So if your display is doing fine, your corals are growing at a good rate, you have more euphyllias or more soft corals or shrooms or zoanthids, you don't need to change that pH that much. But if you have a lot of stony corals, a lot of montes, a lot of acros, fast-growing stony corals absolutely look their best. And I think we have Jeremy back on the line with an actual working mic. Jeremy, are you there?
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you, man. What's going on?
Not much, man. Doing good. Scared me there because there's a delay.
We've got a little bit of delay. I'm going to let you tell us about your pH raising product. Take it from the top. Like, where did you get this idea? How did you come up with this product? What are some of the sidelines that you explored along the way?
Well, the way I got the idea, or way that we came up with the idea, about in May of 2017, there was a video made by Devin at Reef Dudes about what he thought was the benefits of raising pH, and he explained pH or demystified it. And then in about February of 2019, you put out a video that kind of changed the conversation for everyone. So we had been playing with making a pH boosting product for a while, and it was really low on our priority scale, just based on some of the tinkering with. And so when you put out that video in February of 2019, there was a bunch of other YouTubers. BRS did a master series on the effects of raising the pH and the growth that you get from doing that, basically by measuring how much calcium and alkalinity is uptaked by increasing the pH and actually weighing the corals. So that got us to kind of bump the priority of this product a little bit higher. And once we did that, we tinkered with it. So our Boost pH product, Ryan, if you can throw it up, it's a blend of sodium hydroxide and potassium hydroxide. There's a third ingredient there that mitigates the values of those 14. Like Chris was saying earlier, as caustic as it gets. I mean, if you put it on your skin, it'll eat through your skin. If you ingest it, it will probably melt your internal organs. So it's not something that you want to play with, So this isn't something that you want to let your house pets get a hold of. You definitely don't want to let your children get a hold of it. So it's something that takes care in how you store it and how you use it. What we do is we've mitigated the pH component. So this product actually has a pH of around 10, which is similar to like calcium hydroxide or like standard household bleach. So it's a little bit safer than a pH of 14, but you still want to be extremely cognizant of how you store it and how you use it.
So how do you
mid 2020? Well, so we came out with a really conservative version of this, and we beta tested it, and the feedback that we got was just horrendous. Like, nobody liked it. It would move a 1/10 of a point on your pH, and people wanted a stronger formula. So we knew that we had a very conservative formula. So 100th, yes. Oh, 100th, excuse me, not a 10th.
Because a 10th is a lot.
Right. So 100th. So we changed it. Now, I will say this product is not what Chris Meckley is using in his facility is a tool like a hammer, right? This is not a hammer tool. So once you've addressed some of the ways to decrease raising your pH a little bit. So let's say you're running 7.7, 7.8, and you start using a CO2 scrubbing media. You employ a algae scrubber. You ventilate your house. You run a tubing to your skimmer to off gas some of that CO2. Like once you've done those things, this is a product that is going to get you from 8.0 to 8.4. So that's the way this product's typically used. If you want a magic elixir, that's not what this is. This is going to aid you from taking you from getting to your happy place of 8.0 up to 8.2, 3, 4, and so on, depending on how much you use. And it's fairly affordable.
Let me ask you, one of my concerns is what about raising potassium or raising sodium and changing salinity? Do you have any feedback on that?
No. No. Wait, explain a little bit more what you're talking about.
Well, if you're dosing a lot of potassium hydroxide, is this going to raise your potassium levels well beyond what's safe for reef life?
Under our testing, no, it's not going to increase because it is a blend of sodium hydroxide and potassium hydroxide. And I don't think with the standard dose that we're recommending people use that it's going to shift your salinity in your aquarium very much, if at all.
What else do you want people to know about the Boost pH product? It's funny because there's so many pH boosting products in the freshwater and saltwater aquarium industry, and those all work simply usually by just raising your alkalinity. But this is not tweaking with your alkalinity. It's raising the pH more directly, correct?
Have any sodium carbonate or sodium bicarbonate in it at all. So it will not, I won't say will not, it will minimally affect your carbonate hardness in your tank, but it won't change it all that much. So if you're running an 8.5 or 9 DKH, this is not going to take you to 10 or 11 or 12. It's just not designed that way.
Right. Very cool. Well, I think you nailed it on the head by telling people that Boost pH should kind of be the last thing you do after you get fresh air, after you inject CO2, after you run a refugium or a ketomorpho reactor. Once you've done that low-hanging fruit, then it's time to dose the potassium hydroxide to more directly raise your pH. So we have a couple questions about people wanting to know if they can get this product on the market. Is this widely released yet, or is it something that we can look forward to soon?
No, I did a soft launch of it to a very small handful of customers in, I think, around October. We beta tested this all through the spring and summer of 2020. We've tweaked the formula several times based on the feedback from our beta testers. And I think at the current state right now, I'm ready to have people like, BRS won't put anything on their website unless they've tested it before. But I think that you can find this on Marine Depot's website, and you can find it in most local fish stores that are close with Brightwell.
Very cool. Well, Jeremy, thank you so much for I can't hear you very well.
I want to say that after Chris has been talking about the effects of what he sees in raising his pH, how beneficial that's been, that people are going to start screaming for this product. So I thank Chris for all the publicity that he's given us or given to this particular issue. So thank you, Chris.
Very cool. Well, Jeremy, thank you so much for tuning in. I'm going to summarize what you said and talk about our winners. I know we have a couple people online, but it's great to have some feedback from the chemical supply manufacturer themselves. Jeremy, thank you so much for your time, buddy. All right, so we have a few questions about what we've been sharing here. Give me 1 second to pull up my list here. So people know soda ash is will temporarily raise your pH, and this product is going to do exactly that. It is going to temporarily raise your pH. It needs to be continually dosed. So if you're not using a doser, this is not something to add to your tank. There's no other way to add it. Let's see. Frederick Mitch says, I literally just drilled a hole through my window frame and installed an airline to my skimmer and went to home. What needs to be done? That's one way to go about it, especially if it's a rental, it's not your property. Jonah Weidenbaum says, where can you get those products? Bramwell Aquatics is actually very well represented all around the globe. So I think a cursory internet search should reveal which of your local vendors is going to have that for you. Reefkeeper says, that's good to know. All the other pH buffers seems to increase alk, like adding soda ash will raise pH, but only temporarily. And finally, Devin Rich, part of the movement, it's all about that pH dragon. And I just want to stress again, if your Reef aquarium display is looking good, don't worry about it. This is more for people who are trying to raise the bar, push the envelope, and kind of break the limits of how fast corals can grow. But in some cases, if you know that your pH is chronically low, you might want to look at different options for raising your pH, because this is an issue for the ocean that scientists are raising the alarm bell for, and it's also an issue for home aquariums. And it's one that I'm dealing with right now in Colorado winter, where I can't open up the windows and doors as much as I want. And on my project list is to route some airlines directly to the outside. So Ryan, if you want to throw up the slide of our winners for the ReefStock at Home prize packages. Congratulations to Sagentry, Brett Durda, and David Minchell for winning the Ecotech Marine Radion XR30 Pro. These are not little prizes, y'all. These are some good, juicy stuff. And Luis Heredia, Nick Woods, and Joda Weingebom won the Aquavitro division at 125 skimmer. And I want to say this. First, see that 125 protein skimmer. It looks a little small. The pump is a little small, but I am using one in a 180-gallon fully loaded Reef system. I downgraded another skimmer because I wanted more contact time. You guys are really going to enjoy your lights and your protein skimmer. So thanks to everybody for tuning in. Thanks to everybody who participated in this live stream. Vincent, Darwin, Chris, Jeremy, and everyone at the village in Solomon Islands helped to put some of this content together. So thank you to you guys for tuning in. And make sure to tune in to the next episode of February 20th. I'm going completely hands-off. I'm going to let the staff handle a completely different direction of topics and speakers and formats. And I'm very much looking forward to tuning into that so I could be a little more of a passive observer. So it's great to share this with you guys, and we'll catch you guys on the next one. Later, guys.